Yeah, I'll kind of moderate. And the question we're faced here, you know, anytime on Earth you get an isolated population, people who are out of the reach of the law, out of the shield of the law, in one way or another, you get piracy. I mean, that's human nature. If you can see something you can take it. You have to take lives to get it. There are people who are willing to do that. So the question is, when you go to plan your space settlement, you have to contend with the possibility of piracy. What I say is when we get 20 different groups out in space, one of them will turn pirate. So there's two facets to the question. The first one is the gun nuts facet. What kind of weaponry would you take with you? Pete, do you want to address that?
Something I've got that. Space warfare is going to be a little...
Pete isn't a gun nut. The two local gentlemen were gun nuts.
Okay.
So,
I did fire expert in the military, so I know got the point. Space warfare or space fighting will be a bit different in that all you have to do is put a hole through a neighbor's window. He's got vacuum inside his house. So I would imagine the defenses would be considerably different. Perimeter type defense for a colony. For the pirates themselves, something that's mobile. If you're on a surface something like that, sort of a mobile tank kind of thing. Let me just back up a little bit. When we say pirates, there's a little fuzzy definition here. And part of it is that some of people we call heroes, like John Lafitte and John Paul Jones, were actually privateers operating with letters of marque. And if the British caught them, they would have hung them in Trafalgar Square as pirates. So one man's pirate is another guy's hero.
Well, actually,
Can you hear me? Yeah, I agree with that one. Actually, I take it one step further. You could say that one man's pirate is another man's entrepreneur. It really is. I mean, the pirates of the Caribbean were very often soldiers or sailors who had flown on the letter of marque, then turned into pirates for a period of time, and in some cases then became naval heroes later on. I mean,
Father to the nation.
Father to the nation. On the other hand, in the case of, I believe it was Blackbeard, or I forget who it was, who he returned with his crew to England, stood trial, and after he was executed, was hung in a cage. His body was hung in a cage in front of the River Thames for something like 5 years. His rotting corpse there. But this was a man who had started at one time as being one of England's best, working for the Queen or King and Country before he decided to go into business for himself, so to speak. Back to what I said earlier, though, about one man's pirate being another man's entrepreneur. I think a lot of what we may see as space piracy is actually going to resemble perhaps mafia-style truck hijackings. You have to remember, you have to think of what they're going to be going after. What would somebody want to steal in space? Well, an economy, particularly one on the moon or perhaps on Mars, it's going to be, at least in the beginning, with recently established bases, you're going to be going after raw materials. You're going to want things on the moon. You'll probably see a great scarcity of water. Water may be more valuable than anything else, so you'll have guys wanting to steal tanks of water. Oxygen, possibly that, if processes from extracting it from lunar soil are inefficient. then oxygen may be at a premium. We may get guys who want to steal tanks and locks. If we're not using Bob Ford's tether system to get up and down from orbit, then you might want to go up, you might be wanting to steal propellant. Food, of course, will be perhaps at a premium. People may be going after food supplies. Means of growing food. If you don't have hydroponics, then you may actually be finding yourself stealing compost. Mulch may be valuable. You know, you can go, in other words, it won't be going after, the things that people will be going after may not necessarily be things that you think of as being essentially valuable here on Earth. They won't be going after jewels, they won't be going perhaps after microchips, they won't be going after gold, they're going to be going after things that we take pretty much for granted down here. But out there will be quite valuable. It will be the difference between life and death. And if one colony or one settlement has a lot of this stuff and another colony nearby has a scarcity of it, there may be great temptation for somebody to, for a couple of guys to jump on the rover, head over to that place, make a quick hit and run raid. Perhaps with the, maybe they've even bought off somebody on the inside to open the airlock doors so these guys can run in and grab the tanks, haul them out, throw them into the back of the rover, and hightail it over the mountain again before anybody's wiser.
I think the key, though, is that when an act of piracy comes about, you can't have a big, strong government tribute, strength, presence there. The colony must be essentially independent.
Oh yeah, that's what happened.
Same thing for space. You're going to have pirate ships. You were saying it's going to be very difficult because the victim ship, all they have to do is change its vector and you're no longer near it. You can, however, have a pirate ship come in disguised as an old passenger ship, and they say, we've got some sick people and we need the doctor's help. And the next thing you know, they got a party on board. And at that point, it's shivering me timbers and swimming cutlasses or whatever they're going to do. They'll probably hijack the other ship's computer.
You know, that's one thing with space warfare that I've thought of that I don't think I've ever seen anybody use. And that is if you're approaching somebody else's ship, vessel, the first thing you may want to try to do before you fire a shot is to hack into their computer system. Basically, you download a virus that knocks down their engines and communications, renders them helpless. Indeed, in space warfare, before a single shot, as it were, is fired, you may have a kind of punch and counter punch. Hacker wars going on, people trying to mobilize the other or raise shields, raise ice between the two of them so that these things can't happen.
I did do one series of stories in Analog about the Ben Franklin spaceship. Basically, propelled by a solar sail, but had movement ion linear accelerator type things, which we find out is basically fry the other day's ship from a couple of kilometers up. It's basically part of the accelerator.
Yeah.
And that then, instead of being a propulsion system, is a weapon. But they're out there in the asteroid belt, and nobody else has one of these. So they then become sort of king of the rich.
I did this novel that I had published about 10 years ago called Lunar Descent, which, quick plug time, is coming back into print next month if you want to buy this thing. Ace Books, $5.95. Anyway, I gave a scenario for a Earth to Moon hijacking that happens early on in the novel. The setup is this. We have a space colony called Olympus Station. If anybody's read my Near Space stories, you may be familiar with this. You have a space station geosynchronous orbit called Olympus Station, aka SkyCam. Now this one is, there's 100 people on board this station. They're building solar power satellites, okay? On the moon, we have another station, a mining base called Descartes Station. And they're basically, again, another 100 or so guys. And they're supplying the raw material for the guys on SkyCam to build the solar power satellites. Now, for various different reasons, the company which owns both of these installations, Skycore, has been supplying more material, not just material basically, more goods, shall we say, of all sorts, to the guys on the Olympus Station, basically making them the fatted calves and shortchanging the guys who are on the moon. The guys on the moon don't like this very much. They want the stuff that the guys on the Olympus Station have. They figure out a way to get it. Olympus Station is supplied from Earth by shuttles launched from Cape Canaveral. These shuttles go to low orbit and then launch from the payload base. These are second-generation shuttles with flyback boosters of the type that we described earlier this afternoon. Within the payload bay are orbital transfer vehicles, that unmanned cargo craft, like big canisters with a rocket on the back and an inertial internal guidance system. What you do is, how they rig it up is that they got some guy who's working at the Cape. He works in the spacecraft processing facility, the hangar, to reprogram the guidance system inside the orbital transfer vehicle, so that once it reaches orbit and the OTV is launched from the payload bay, instead of going where it should, which is to Olympus Station, it flies off into space and won't respond to any commands. It looks like, from the ground and from the cockpit of the shuttle, it looks like a misfire. This thing is simply gone AWOL. It's been lost in space, warning. Anyway, it is not lost in space. What it is doing is that it is going to the moon. You have another spacecraft with a lunar tug, which is in orbit. They rescue the OTV, bring it aboard, and they've got the good, open it up, and they've got the goodies. The way that this was stopped, or the way they attempted to stop this, that is the people in Skycorp, they kind of figure that the people on the moon are responsible for doing this. Now, they don't want to hurt their own guys, they just want to stop, okay? They want to arrest the guilty culprits. So what they load into the OTV is a dye canister, the same type that you use to foil bank robbers. So when they open up the canister, the OTV, the dye canister explodes, throws indelible blue ink across everybody who happens to be within the spacecraft. And so when the spacecraft lurches home and lands on the ground again, the security officer at the Descartes Station quickly figures out who's responsible. Can figure out who's responsible. That isn't quite the way that it works in the novel, but that's essentially it. I think that the point I was trying to make with that is that I think before people start using active measures to prevent piracy, before they start breaking out the guns and tanks and so forth, they probably would go more for passive measures of this nature.
Well, the reason I made it a two-part question is obviously a well-rifled barrel can, in an airless planet, can put a slug an awful long ways, especially if you can compute the effect of gravity. But it's a real possibility that the State Department or whoever's standing at the gate isn't going to let you take one on your trip. So yeah, that was my question. That was my second question. If you can't take what we consider weapons, how do you defend yourself against piracy?
Well, first off, you're defending yourself against meteorites, micrometeorites anyway. So you're probably going to build a lunar dome, put some regolith on top of it. That's going to stop a slug. Somebody can get a rifle, semi-automatic.
Oh, yeah, the pirates will have them.
Oh, the pirates have.
Oh, yeah, they'll have them.
Well, the other thing is, as I mentioned in Ben Franklin, was you do have some resources at hand. In this one, the plasma rocket was itself a weapon. There are other similar, dangerous equipment that you might find in mining, which, they may be operated only by trained people simply because they're dangerous. And if they're dangerous to you, you can make them dangerous to somebody sitting next to you. Okay, now it's a weapon.
Well, when it comes right down to it, when you stop and realize that the conventional spacesuit is actually fairly vulnerable. I mean, a slingshot would do the job if you aim it right. Honestly, I mean, it'd be rather interesting to see a hijacking performed with guys building back slingshots with pieces of rock. I mean, that hit right in the visor was a stone. Yeah, it would be just as dangerous.
Those are pretty tough basements.
Yeah, but the rocks could be tough too.
Yeah.
I'm speaking hypothetically.
Speaking of which, if you're just going to fling rocks, remember the moon is our harsh mistress.
Oh, right.
All he did was throw rocks down at the Earth.
Yeah,
Let the Earth, some gravity will accelerate it.
They used a mass driver, but almost anything will work. Bow and arrow, I mean, would work. Actually, my favorite
I don't
high-tech.
think an arrow would go through a faceplate. It would go through the fabric.
Right, that's what I mean. Or perhaps even better, a crossbow.
Yeah.
Crossbow would work down nice.
And a crossbow can be made out of some pretty common materials.
Yeah, it's got a nice flat trajectory to it.
Yeah.
I mean, I fired one of those things, and yeah, that worked pretty well.
There is one thing about crossbow bolts and arrows, is that a little feathering on the end does not help
No.
in vacuum. Okay, so
It looks pretty though.
learning to fire one in a vacuum, it may have to lose some of your original training.
Yeah. Leslie, you got a question?
To repeat that, Leslie said that the way you get your weapons up is you disassemble them into components.
I think war, again,
We call ourselves in a Revolutionary War with John Paul Jones. The British had some really not nice names for us. And pirate was one of the more dignified of it. Okay? So one guy's piracy is another guy's revolution.
yeah, as we were saying earlier, I came in late, but said that one man's piracy is another man's entrepreneurship. Or even just which side you're on, really. It's a matter of definition. As for the difference between piracy and war, piracy I basically see as well, again, entrepreneurship under a different name. I mean, you're not going out there to war is, as somebody once said, is diplomacy under different circumstances. I mean, it's usually done for political reasons of one sort or the other. Whereas piracy, you're going after resources. You're basically grabbing what the other guy's got. You may not even have anything against him personally. You may actually like the guy, but you want what he has. Yeah, it's theft.
The solar nation might be able to trust you because if you fire But you're going to go that way when the court goes that way.
Which is why which is why recoilless weapons work best of all. I mean, you can have recoilless guns and you can have recoilless rifles, but well, then again, it's relative speaking. What we call a recoilless gun here on Earth is still going to knock you across the room if you fire it in 0G. Actually, you'd probably be using, keeping that in mind, you'd probably be using things like tasers. Non-lethal weapons might work the best of all when you stop and think about it. Because, well, for one thing, until you get to the point that you have a lot, I mean, and I do mean a lot, as in the millions, of people living in space, there's always the potential that the guy who you knock down 1 week, you may have to depend upon the next week, all right? In that case, you don't want to piss him off real bad by killing his cousin. So if you can do a truck hijacking and you at least leave the victims behind alive, then there may not be repercussions that you particularly don't want.
They're not going to get a vigilante squad together and come for you.
Right, exactly. They're going to say, oh, well, hell, he just took off with some water.
Well, see,
Next week we'll grab his water.
Once you've got a vigilante squad, then now that's a form of government. And I think piracy happens when there is no government present. Now, it can be argued that the 13 colonies did not really have much government. They had religious foundations. That religion was, for all practical purposes, an organizing government. Mm-hmm. Okay? And back to the thing of the vigilante, if the pirates become too good at what they're doing, people will form a government. Yeah. And band together and go out.
Well, that's what happened in the Caribbean. During the 1600s, from about 1500 through the 1600s, the government of the Caribbean basically was pirates. I mean, you had colonies and settlements on the individual islands, but you had places like Jamaica, which was basically a pirate colony. And the pirates, I mean, this was Rick Tomlinson a little while ago was talking about Miracore here, and in very passing, he happened to mention that the pirates were usually in some ways better at the democracy game or the government game than the people who worked, who lived in, who had formed those settlements. The captains of pirate ships were captains only as long as their crew wanted them to be captains, or allowed them to be captains. And many captains were thrown overboard or hanged by their own crew. Right, for various different reasons. It may well be, it may well be that that colonies that have piracy at their heart may operate better than the ones that are operated by governments and corporations. Pardon me? That was who I was trying to remember anymore. Yeah, well, it was Henry Morgan I was trying to remember, who eventually returned to England and was along with his crew, and were executed. His body was hung in the cage until it rotted. I mean, it was there for good. Was it Morgan? Okay, but no, I don't think it was Blackbeard. Blackbeard was beheaded. Kidd, thank you. It's Kidd who did this. I read a book on piracy. I'm trying to remember the book on piracy, Under the Black Flag, which, by the way, if you want a very, very good book to read on piracy, Under the Black Flag, which is one of the definitive histories of piracy, particularly in the Caribbean. You know, on the other hand, it may be that there'll be places that in space, going back to talking space now, but still using Terran parallels. There may be places that pirates may not want to go to out of fear. When I was down in the Caribbean a couple of years ago, we stayed on an island called Dominica. And Dominica had an interesting history in that it was relatively untouched by pirates. All the other islands up and down the Lesser Antilles have been subjected to pirate raids, but you know, by the Spanish, English, and French pirates. But they stayed away from Dominica, even though it had, I mean, it was a very big island, it had a lot of resources and so forth. The reason why they stayed away was that the Carib Indians who lived there had a reputation for cannibalism. Now, the interesting thing was that it was an unwarranted reputation. They weren't cannibals. But they had real good PR. That was basically what came down to it. They had an unjustified reputation. So they stayed away. The pirates of the Caribbean state deliberately avoided Dominica and hit everywhere else because out of fear. And it could well be that it might be that a colony, say on Mars or on the Moon, gets itself a reputation. Well, maybe not cannibalism, but something really nasty. I mean, maybe they do hang the first pirate who comes through there. The first time, what? Or a leper colony.
Grandpa's final duty would be to have his skull hung on a post outside.
Right. I mean, you know, the first guy who comes over the hill with a rover trying to grab those hypothetical tanks of water gets thrown out the airlock without the benefit of the air suit, and then his body is taken back to the place where it came from and dumped outside their airlock. With a little sign, you know, stay away from Dallas Marineris. After this, everybody says, no thanks, I think we'll leave these guys alone.
Okay, we're up against our time now. Let's take a few questions and call it a day.
I was interested in talking earlier from your book about the dialects of weapon usage beginning to use the riot control. It's called a skunk group. It's basically a paintball gun. The paintball has a blue dye in it, and it also has a chemical that skunks use to defend themselves, and they fire the weapon at agitators and crowds. It marks the agitators so that it is identified later, and the smell makes it impossible for him to hide in the crowd because everybody. So if you're talking about non-lethal weapons in a pirate attack, the guys come in the airlock and blasting everybody with these things, which, if you've ever been smelled a skunk, you basically want to curl up and start shooting,
Which not only that, but in a closed compartment, in a closed environment like in a spacecraft, could be really obnoxious.
And you would be in a spacesuit, so you would smell it.
Until you get back into your craft and everybody, they want to throw you right back out of the airlock again. Yeah.
Another weapon, the electronic gun.
Tasers, yeah.
What's the danger of that damaging working for
It's 20,000 volts is the shot on one of those. It's two wires that shoot straight out, and they give you a brief 20,000 volt charge that knocks you on your butt, paralyzes you for about, I think it's 4 or 5 minutes. I've seen them demonstrated. And I don't know what, I guess I have to leave it up to an electrical engineer.
Yeah, most spacecraft equipment is doubly shielded and grounded, simply to keep it from any other piece of equipment that's malfunctioning. But also you will get eddy currents in the hull in space. So it's all shielded and grounded. So the taser would basically short out on whatever the equipment case was. 20,000 volts will mess up the inside of the computer, but you have to have the computer open and the circuit boards exposed to do damage. Okay?
Yeah, in other words, it would have the desired effect. It takes out the guys, but not the equipment. That's a good point.
It's getting late in the day, but I just had a thought. If you guys are talking about traveling to another planet and colonization and everything, and you're talking about weapons, slingshots, swords, you don't think some entrepreneur down here, this planet isn't going to come up with something like, you know, they force me with you or something like that, Hobie can Hobie. Sticks that lights up and lets you have it.
Well, they could.
Come up with something.
They might. They very might well come up with something more deadly than this. And this has always been. I mean, this is where arms races come in. When somebody invents something else that is a little more deadly. The point that I was trying to make, though, is that when you start using lethal force like this in a society where everybody essentially knows everybody else, you have a lot of repercussions, and that's why I sort of have, I just have my doubts that if this type of thing happens, that lethal weapons will be the things of first resort.
Well, where pirates are going to come from colonies that failed,
Yeah.
and they will probably start preying on their neighbors, and it'll be a grab and run kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and in which case you don't want to kill off the other guy because you don't want to take victims of this nature because then you knock off you knock off Uncle Bill and Cousin Sue and all this, and the next thing you know, I mean, you've got all their relatives coming over the hill, plenty irritated at what you've done. Yes, sir. Yeah, they work just fine. No. In one of my novels, King of Infinite Space, I took the sword and did it one better and made it a charged sword. Basically, I took the best attributes of a sword and the best attributes of a taser and put them together. So you had an electrically charged sword. So that you didn't have to even give somebody a real, you didn't even have to cut somebody for it to be effective. All you had to do is slap them against the side of the thing and they were paralyzed. A bit like a
There
circus.
is one difference though in sword fighting, or knife fighting for that matter. In 0G, the tactics are all different.
Oh yeah, you'd be
And
bouncing around the room.
In Asterisk, at one point, I have one fool try and take on another with a baseball bat. And of course, every time you go like that, your body goes the other way. And what the smart guy does is he grabs the end of the bat and just holds it still. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to, kind of flail around all over the place. It was kind of a funny scene.
That worked.
Yeah, I think it worked for comedic effect.
I did in King of Infinite Space, I did have a sword fight scene that was done in 0G. And that was a real difficult scene to write because I had to try to figure out, I know a little bit about sword fighting because I used to be a member of the Society of Creative Anachronists, okay? So I got a little bit of that down, but then you have to try to imagine this in a closed compartment, which by the way had a lot of people in it at the same time. And these guys were literally bouncing off the room, and off the ceiling, and off the floor, and it was an interesting scene. And essentially, as I recall, was that I forget how I ended up finishing. Oh yeah, it essentially was that somebody took the sword and basically whacked him up behind the head. And it wasn't even a non-lethal blow, it was just enough to knock him out. He did it, as I recall, sort of a ricochet shot. He went off the wall and came back and came on the guy from behind. Yeah, it was difficult to do that one. Yes, sir.
He who gets anchorage first wins.
Well, yeah, if you can find a hand strap or some way to either anchor your foot or hold on to a ceiling rung with one hand, and yeah, you might be able to do it that way. Yes, sir.
You might get a cylindrical volume, so you just run around the outside. As long as you keep moving, you've got some typical force.
If you can run fast enough.
It's like the Skylab's kind of astronaut standard astronaut rig,
Right.
And they run around, and it's perfectly normal running, as long as it's moving, and you have a running battle like that.
There's no final comment or two as we go around.
Just to show you that there are all kinds of pirates, there is an another convention that's held here in Arizona, usually up in Phoenix area, called CorsairCon, about every other year. And their theme is pirates, and people walk around in all costumes and dress up as pirates of various ages, including space pirates. And I was to be on a panel at that convention, but that day, it was Friday of the convention, I had another engagement out of town, I was in Chicago. I said, but I'll get there, early in the afternoon. And so I got into town late, and I called my house, and I told my daughter, I don't have time to go get my pirate costume, grab it and meet me at the hotel. So I walked into the hotel wearing my gray three-piece suit. This is I do have a gray three-piece suit, and a shade plate case, and I can clean up pretty well. And anyway, I walked in there, and here was everybody dressed out as pirates, and I'm looking definitely out of place. And somebody looked at me and said, what kind of costume is that? And I looked at it and said, I'm a corporate pirate.
And on that note,
They gave me a award for the scariest tall costume.
Okay, thanks for coming. You still have time to get to dinner.
thank you very much.